everybody. Good afternoon. I am Andrew Capetta, the Manager of Collection and Exhibition Programs at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and I'd like to welcome you to today's desktop dialogue. We're going to start in a minute or two and wait for other guests to log on. But use this time to familiarize yourself with the Q&A interface to the right of your screen. If you've been coming every week, this is familiar to you, but if you're new, welcome. And just so you know, if you've not used this kind of interface before, you can drop a question or a comment in that sort of chat window to the right during the program at any time. If you'd like to include your name, we'd love to know who you are. There's a space right above it where you can type in your name above your question. If you prefer to remain anonymous, you can do that too, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. We're going to select some of them to answer at certain points in our dialogue, and we're of course going to try and respond to as many as we can in the allotted time, but do understand that we can't get to every question. We will also use the Q&A to post links to the artworks on CMA's collection online, so you can look closely at them yourself while you're listening to our discussion. And we'll also use the Q&A to post any additional information and resources that you might find helpful or useful. So just to introduce this week's desktop dialogue, which is titled Healing and Heritage. For this week's session, we're going to discuss how artworks and art practices can heal. For some faith-based traditions, cultural objects play an important role in acts of healing. And some of these objects are now in museums, and we view them as works of art. For others, the making or even remaking of a cultural artifact can be a healing action too. So I think we'll have this really interesting, expansive conversation around this topic. It should be compelling, and again, we welcome questions and comments from your audience at any time during the program. Now I'd like to introduce this afternoon's guests. First, I'd like to welcome Kristen Windmuller-Luna, CMA's Curator of African Art. Welcome, Kristen. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
And I'd also like to welcome Orlando Caraballo. Orlando is my colleague in public and academic engagement, and he is the studio engagement specialist for Studio Go, among many other things, as well as a practicing artist. Orlando, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Great. It's wonderful to have you both. So the first object we're going to look at, I think we're going to put it up now, is a crucifix from the late 19th or early 20th century. It's made of copper alloy, which means that it's copper mixed with some other metals, but primarily copper, as well as iron and wood. And this crucifix comes from the historic Congo kingdom, which is was located in Central Africa. Now, we're going to kind of get a sense of a little bit more about the Congo kingdom in a moment. And as you explained to me, Kristen, the artist who made this crucifix fused imagery, put together imagery from two belief systems, one with a longer history in the region and another Christianity that arrived to this area in the 15th century, I believe. Kristen, could you, first of all, before we dive into this object, could you briefly explain how these two belief systems came together? Because it's quite interesting and new to me.
Hi, Andrew. Absolutely. Before beginning, though, I do want to start our discussion today with a moment of gratitude and acknowledge where we all are presenting from today in Cleveland, Ohio. So on behalf of all of us, we wish to express our gratitude for the land that we are on, and for its original inhabitants, and for their descendants throughout Northeast Ohio. We also wish to express gratitude to all of you for spending part of your day with us, and to the artists who made the works we're discussing. Big thanks as well to our colleagues Sean and Jackie, who are coordinating this live event from behind the scenes, and to our other colleagues who helped to produce it. So to your question, if we could bring up that map, please, Sean. So a quick gloss of the whens and wheres of the Congo Kingdom. Congo formed around the 1300s in what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Republic of Congo, and Angola. And around 1491, the king Nzinga Ankuwu embraced Catholicism and brought his kingdom into a global network of Christian kingdoms. art became a tool of conversion and was a way to connect faiths old and new under royal direction, as well as a way for everyday people to exercise their agency by remixing, adopting, and even rejecting different aspects of religious elements. Congo Christian art was uniquely Central African, but at the same time, it was part of a global Christian symbolism.
Great. Thank you. That's really interesting. So by the time this crucifix was made, Christianity was really was what I'm looking for, deep part, right, of Congo society. So then going back to this crucifix, what are some of the details, Kristen, that reflect these sort of dual origins, like these sort of older maybe religious practices and Christianity? How did they combine them? How do we see it here?
Yeah, absolutely. By the time the artist made this, Christianity had already been the faith of the kingdom for several centuries. And artists had begun really deeply localizing Christianity to make it reflect their personal beliefs, but also make it reflect the place that they were in. If we can zoom into the head of Christ, we can see that immediately. The first crosses that were brought to Congo came from Portugal and Italy. So Christ looked like a European man. This image of Christ has braids, like a man from Congo would have had. If we move all the way down to Christ's feet, we see a figure who is extremely worn down now from a lot of touching. And this is either a figure that's a Portuguese depiction of the praying Virgin Mary, or it could be a Congolese person who is kneeling with their hands clasped together in a gesture of respect or of mourning. So we can see it in both ways. The place that we can really see those blendings and overlayings of two religions is Christ's waist wrapper. So we can move back up to the center of that object. At the center, we can see a diagonal kind of X shape incised into the metal. And this is a link both to the cross of Christianity and to cross shapes in indigenous Congo belief systems. So let's move on to that photo of the cave drawings that we have. So this is a photo of the Ntadi cave that Dr. Geoffrey Heimlich took, and it shows 3 drawings of cross shapes. In the indigenous Congo religion, this is called the Dikenga dia Congo. The Dikenga dia Congo shows the stages of the life cycle: birth, life, end of life, and rebirth. We can see how that can easily relate to the idea of Christ's birth, life, ascension, and eventual resurrection. So ideas like life cycles and a single creator God from the Congo religion very easily fuse with central tenets of Christianity. Even after Catholicism becomes the main faith in Congo, you do have elements of Congo's original religion that remain, particularly this social healing cult called Kimpazi that is involved in really lifting up society and settling disputes. And we believe that both the cross shape and Kimpazi probably predated Christianity. So if we return to that cross one last time, we can really see how these layered faiths accumulate to talk about messages of life cycles and ultimately about healing.
That's really interesting because it's always fascinating to think about why maybe a culture will adopt certain maybe images, right, when they're adopting something from another culture, and maybe because they connect or conform or relate to something that already exists. And it's really fascinating, Kristen. Now, so you just mentioned healing. How was this object used, or how is it associated with acts of healing? Is there any knowledge of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see in how the object looks today, those physical traces of healing. In the Christian context, this would have been associated with healing through prayer or through miracles. And in that Kimpazi cult that I mentioned before, the idea of social healing. If we look at the figure of Christ, he's made from another kind of copper alloy, as you just explained really well earlier, a mix of other kinds of metals. When that metal is first cast, it's pretty dark. But as you keep touching it, the surface lightens. And actually, I have a bracelet on today that's cast in a similar way, made out of a copper oil alloy. And you can see on the inside, which is up against my skin, it's very, very shiny. Whereas on the outside, in the parts of the texture where it doesn't touch against my skin, it still remains dark. So we can see every part that's light on the surface of Christ's body, and where the details are worn down on that figure at the bottom. Those are the physical traces of human touch where someone appealed to this for maybe healing or to have a prayer answered. If we flip it over to the back and look at the wood, something we typically can't see in the gallery when this is on view, we can see that the surface is actually crusty. And these are layers of oils and other substances that were used to anoint the cross during moments of prayer or healing ceremonies. And of course, we see this kind of change, this physical interaction with other objects in the Congo religious world. In a pendant of St. Anthony of Padua that's now in the Metropolitan Museum, we can see that same kind of surface change. This pendant would have been worn close to the body. And for any one of you who's worn a necklace, whether it's a religious one or not, you end up touching it during the day, whether it's just an absent-minded touch or for comfort or for healing. And over time, the surface changes. We can see St. Anthony's features are very, very smooth, and the Christ child's face is practically gone. If we want to really think about healing, this is a particular unique idea in Congo. During, let's say, the turn of the 1700s, Congo had been devastated by civil wars, and a noblewoman named Dona Beatriz Kimpavita declared herself the reincarnation of St. Anthony, and she led a movement of social healing to try to bring back her devastated kingdom. And in doing so, she recentered the stories of the Bible into Congo and used the symbol of St. Anthony as a symbol of her followers. And I think, returning back to the crucifix that we started with, we can think of these physical traces of touch that we see, the changed wood, the smooth and shiny metal, as ways to connect with people who lived many centuries ago, and in some cases, many thousands of miles away from us, and who may practice the same religion as us, or who may not have. And I would love to know more about what some of our audience members have in their lives that have these similar traces of touch or these connections to healing. And if any of you out there have those kind of connections, please put them in the chat for us to learn about and to discuss.
Yeah, please do. And that's also a prompt. If you please put in anything that, following Kristen's prompt, or any other questions and comments you have. And we actually have one that just came in that I think Kristen would be a great one to answer very quickly. Is the cross on view in the galleries now?
Yes, the cross is on view in the galleries right now. And we will look forward to having you see it in person when we reopen to the public in future months.
I know. And then also on top of that, I think, what's great is that you're also showing some parts of the cross that are not immediately visible, like the back, which is great. It's really, really wonderful. Orlando, I think we have some questions coming in, but is there anything that, do you have anything that you, that kind of follows Kristen's prompt that, you kind of have around you as some sort of charm?
Yeah, I do actually. Yesterday, when I was perusing my studio desk and cleaning things, I actually found this rosary ring from my grandfather, who's now passed away, but he was a devout Catholic, and he would use this every day to do his rosary prayers. And the really fascinating thing as it pertains to touch is one side, it's like mirrored on both sides, but one side, the little Christ, is really smooth, and the other side, he has very detailed. I'm not sure if you can capture it on this camera, but it's really interesting to see the trace of my grandfather's touch on this very item.
Yeah. No, it's so wonderful to think about, right? These sort of the appearance of an object is happens not only is through its function or use,
Yeah.
We have a great question from a viewer, Barbara Hoffman, and Kristen. I think this is something maybe you could possibly answer. Are the marks on the sides scarification? And maybe we could go to the front side of the cross to answer that.
Sure.
And maybe to that area that I think Barbara's talking about. Hmm?
Yeah, so Sean and Barbara, thank you so much for your question. Sean, if you could move down just a little bit further on Christ's torso. So we're looking at Christ in a moment of incredible agony, and he's extremely emaciated. When the body is crucified, you're hanging from your arms, and the body essentially descends by the weight of gravity. So those incised marks that we're seeing are actually his ribs being delineated against his rib cage in very stark detail. So we can see these moments of pain, and you can imagine the viewer would feel real empathy and a real sense of the bodily sensations of Christ in this. And it would really be an inspirational object.
That's interesting, because I mean, my first, I would think too, because I know of certain African societies, sub-Saharan African societies, where scarification is part of the society. In this case, it's not something that exists in Congo, as far as you know.
It certainly is in Congo, and we see beautiful examples of scarification related to women's life cycles and their experiences and their power and strength of women. However, in this particular case, it is just depicting a feature of anatomy.
Right. It's so interesting, right? I bring certain knowledge to this and learn new things about what is actually being represented. So I think we're going to move on to our next work that we're going to discuss this afternoon. And this is an accordion folded book. And what we're looking at is actually one page, one segment of this accordion folded book by an American-Mexican artist, Enrique Shibuya. The book is titled, it's in a translated title, The Adventures of the Modernist Cannibals. And actually the title is in French. It's kind of interesting too. And this book, like the Congo crucifix, you might be thinking, why are we looking at these two things together? Merges imagery from different cultural origins. And Shibuya is kind of considered a conceptual artist in that he really likes to bring these images together to really put forth an idea, right? And as part of his artistic practice, he invents documents like this book as a way to create archives that do not exist for certain indigenous groups or societies. Now, those of you who are looking alongside us on Collection Online, feel free to flip through the pages of the book by selecting alternate views. It's a great way to see the other images. We won't get everything. Now, Orlando, I know this is a book that really captivated you when it was on view at CMA a year or two ago. How would you, before we kind of dive into this work, how would you describe Shibuya's practice, just to give everyone an introduction?
Yeah, for sure. So first, hi everyone. And before answering the question, I would like to extend my deepest thank yous to the team of curators that really helped me round together all this information on this work, namely Sue Berg, Emily Peters, Brittany Salisbury, and Kristen. So let's get into it. This codex, or written manuscript, is one of the many tools Shibuya uses to take viewers on a journey through time, to contextualize how he understands his American-Mexican identity against the lost histories and civilizations of Mesoamerica and its European conquerors, and the historically complex relationship between both Mexico and the United States. In works like this, Shibuya uses two methods, reverse modernism and reverse anthropology, where he imagines a world where the indigenous people of Mesoamerica were the ones who discovered the Europeans and cannibalized their art under the guise of aesthetic appreciation.
That's really fascinating. So it's almost like he's reimagining history and the kind of document that, if we rethought this history, we would have as a result. That's really fascinating. Exactly. So we're looking at this particular page of the book, which is somewhere in the middle. what kind of imagery is then like Shibuya bringing together, and why to sort of reimagine this history?
Yeah. So before diving into the imagery, I think it's important to take note of the materials used to create the book. So this codex is made of papel de amate, which is a type of paper widely used by a majority of Mesoamerican cultures in the pre-Hispanic, pre-contact times. So upon the arrival of the Spanish, it was widely banned and replaced by European papers. And Shibuya, knowing this, purposely used this paper in the use of his own codex to bear a striking resemblance to the few codexes or codices that have survived from antiquity. And like the old codices, this particular one was meant to be read from right to left instead of left to right. So on this page, we actually have a battle between the strong Adelita character and Superman. So Adelita is a heroine from Mexican comic books that embodies the strength of Mexican women during the Mexican Revolution. Superman here stands as a symbol for the strength and vitality of the United States. Superman is also getting his butt whooped by Adelita while she exclaims "Orale," which is a Mexican colloquialism for hell yeah or right on. So moving to our backdrop, we have an appropriated page from one of the surviving Mesoamerican manuscripts, perhaps one from one of the few surviving Mayan codices. So there are creatures and warriors, floating heads and whimsical figures, and a snake, which in Mayan culture were regarded as symbols of rebirth and renewal, as vehicles for the spirits and celestial bodies to cross the heavens. This is really powerful when relating back to the heroic battle in the foreground, as it may suggest the ushering in of a new point of view or a restructuring of existing power dynamics. Not to be ignored is a sombrero-wearing character in the lower left-hand corner, perhaps Pancho Villa, one of the leaders of the Mexican Revolution and a mascot of sorts for the farm workers movement. Curiously enough, he's wearing some sort of strange glass helmet. I see him as a sort of time-traveling guide, leading us to the next page. I say this because not only does he appear there, but his floating head appears to the left of the snake in the antiquated codex page. So, in this one page, we span from Mayan history to the comics of the 20th century Mexico and United States, from upturned angelic European baby heads to Mexican time travelers. And this is but one page of this entire narrative, which is wild. We could spend days diving into all the deeper meanings that this book might hold.
No, it is so rich, but I think just you kind of like decoding, I'll say it, that page for all of us really gives you, I think, a better sense of what this work is all about. Now, why are you turning into it now? Because everyone who's out there, when we develop these conversations, it's we really want to work together and think about what are we thinking about, right? When we're all working remotely and things are changing day by day, week by week. Why are you thinking about this object now? What do you find healing about it in some way?
Yeah.
And then, people, audience, feel free to ask questions. We have a couple that are on deck that are great. So, sorry, Orlando.
Wonderful.
Just wanted to remind our audience.
Cool. So yeah, in a work like this, Shibuya is playfully reimagining history as we understand it, to present something different from the dominant westernized point of view and perspective. And I see that as artistic agency in full effect. To weave together a narrative that seeks to place its maker in the context of time is important because it provides a more personal insight into the happenings of a culture's people. As an artist myself, looking at a work like this brings to the forefront alien histories and cultural narratives that span across time and space. And I find it inspiring because it encourages me to be brave and bold in sharing my stories from my own Puerto Rican culture and heritage into my work in playful and meaningful ways. For Shibuya, nothing in history is off the table, and the same goes for us. If you're anything like me, you may find yourself with a lot more time than normal to reflect on your life and your place in the world. For many of us, it's difficult and perhaps even emotionally draining as we yearn for what was and hope for what could be. But there is reward in reflection and in contextualizing our life journeys. I see Shibuya's work along these lines. Each and every one of us has a story worth telling and a history to contribute to. all it takes is an understanding of the past, the hope for the future, and a will to ground yourself in the present.
Wonderful. So it's almost like in some ways like really empowering at this moment that we might not feel, incredibly empowered, I think is a wonderful reflection. I just want to try some questions. They're great. And then Kristen and Orlando, feel free to, please have questions for each other. But one is, I think, from an anonymous viewer, I think it's in reference to the page that we were looking at, the Superman Adelita page. The viewer just wanted to know what was on the right. So if we could just zoom in, I guess, to the right-hand side, and is there what is on the right, I guess, or what do you think they might be referencing? We're guessing,
are we speaking of the angelic baby, or on the right panel of the?
Yeah, that might be. I think that might be what they're in reference to. Yeah, this angelic. Yeah.
For sure. I don't exactly know where this particular angelic figurehead comes from, but a lot of scholarship around this may just allude to the presence of European origins, and this could be juxtaposed against the codex page. So there's a sort of relationship between both Europe and the Mesoamerican people, and then Mexico and the United States.
Yeah. If I can jump in for just a second, this is a kind of Baroque angel that you see all over the world. And in parts of Ethiopia where I've worked, you see this angel in churches from the 1600s. And thinking particularly of the context of Mexico and the way that Shibuya uses incredible layering, I think the Templo Mayor in Mexico City, which is an Aztec temple, and the layering of the major metropolitan cathedral over it. This literal layering of faiths and history and conquering and remaking, and how Shibuya is making and unmaking that, and having this angel spiraling out of control is really actively rewriting what we see, in architecture happening in Mexico. And that makes me want to ask Orlando, can you tell us more about the actual printmaking techniques that he's using for this?
Yeah, for sure. It's really important, I think, to the context of what he's talking about. So a majority of this book is using lithography and woodcuts as printing techniques, both of which I think have a poetic relationship. Lithography is using stones that you could basically etch images into to reproduce several prints of whatever the original drawing is of, which is important because when thinking about printmaking as a democratic way of sharing knowledge versus a painting, which is a singular object that is on the wall, it lends itself to the idea of Shibuya wanted to share this message with more than just one person, to share it with a group of people, and to offer that up as open source knowledge.
This might be related, but one of our viewers, an anonymous viewer, asks, what is the significance of using cartoon figures? That is a great question.
That's fascinating. I've thought about that quite a bit myself. I think it just lends itself to the history of political cartoons, especially as it pertains to Mexico and how important they were during the revolution. It's sort of a format that the people can gravitate to and understand, especially as we move. Like his work is referencing a lot of 20th century Mexico and the United States, and moving it into the 21st century. It's sort of a visual language that different generations can access and relate to.
Wonderful. And I think, Kristen, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or
in thinking about disseminating too, especially what Orlando is saying about getting this out to a wide amount of people, I think the artist in Congo made the same kind of choice. They could have made a painting and that could have been in one church. But if you make something in brass like that, artists started to use molds to make these objects at certain points. So you could really mass produce. For the most part, they're using lost wax casting, which does make unique objects. But when you start to bring in molds, you can do multiples. And that's really a way to to spread the faith, to spread the message, whatever you have. So thinking about artist multiples in completely different eras and completely different places. I just want to go back to the comments quickly because there was a great note from someone named Veronica who mentioned that she inherited a stone sewing needle from her grandfather, who was of Native American heritage, and that's something that she wears on a cord, and it gives her strength during tough times. And I found that something incredibly evocative because you think about sewing. That's joining things together. That is healing things. What do we do when someone's skin is broken? We sew that together and we heal that. And I found that was such a beautiful, beautiful heirloom. So thank you, Veronica, for sharing that.
No, it's wonderful to... Oh, go ahead, Kristen, please.
Yeah, and Orlando, someone asked about your grandfather's rosary ring, too, if he wore it as a ring or on a chain.
I actually did at one point, but my chain broke. So I wasn't able to do that anymore, but I still keep it on my desk and, just like hold it from time to time when I'm just thinking or processing life.
I think it's very interesting. One of the things that we're thinking about is accessibility and connections, whether it's in the choices that the artist is making formally, using a cartoon figure that might be recognizable, the Congo crucifix, right, making Christ look from the region, right? Or in terms of the material choices, right? In order to make multiples. There's some other, thank you for bringing up those comments, Kristen. There's so many questions, but there's one about Shibuya. Well, this is a comment about Shibuya growing up in Mexico with Superman, Catholicism, and pre-Columbian artifacts, and how maybe that's informed by his background, which is a great comment. Another anonymous viewer asked, why did Shibuya choose the book format rather than single sheets? I think that's a great question. Orlando or Kristen, do you have any thoughts about that? In particular, the meaning of that format? Oh,
yeah. So going back to this conversation of codex and him wanting to replenish, as you described earlier, him wanting to replenish the archives of these lost wealth of knowledge. This accordion-style book was the same format that the surviving codices from antiquity take, and he wanted to continue that visual language in that form so that they really felt an extension or a continuation of the stories of old.
We also have a great question that's, I think, will clarify. There's a page, Sean, if you could show with the, I think it has a reproduction of like a Monet sort of image on it. Someone says on the last image, the bridge looks similar to Monet's water lilies, and someone else has a question about that same page, asking what's happening with the figure. There's a figure that seems to be like dismembering a figure. So if we could just show that again, I think we could clarify our viewers.
I think it's the second to last page.
Right. Yes, what is the prior one with the one person on the ground? That's it. Yeah, that looks dismembered. What appears to, what's happening there? They have a question about that, our anonymous viewer.
Okay, yeah. I have my own interpretation of this particular page. There is a direct relationship being drawn between the sombrero wearing caricature that is dissecting what I believe to be a European anatomical model, and the sombrero wearing man that is in this water. And I think one is depicting, and of course, shout out to the little Picasso reproduction in the background there. I think there's a comparison being made between the idea of personhood and caricature, and what it means to be a human, and what it means to be, seen as something less than. And with this caricature, he's breaking into this European anatomical model. And as you can see, where he's splitting open and where he himself is split open is the same. And I think there's this conversation of we are the same, we are equal, we are not different. And it could have been the man in the water dissecting, but it's the caricature. So I think there's something being said about this idea of humanity and humanism and how we are more similar than different.
That's a really nice interpretation. Thank you for taking time. This is the one thing about, we were saying, and when we were kind of talking about this, right, Kristen and Orlando, this book is so rich, you could keep on going and going. Maybe just one last question, and maybe Kristen, I think this is something you could speak to from a viewer named Megan Bill. In this moment, when many of us are denied access to physical collections and museums, how do you see the role of art in our own healing now in this moment? Thank you, Megan. It's a great question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. And I know Megan and I work together at the Brooklyn Museum, so shout out to my brilliant and wonderful colleague there. And I know all of us, this is a question near and dear to our hearts right now as we are missing touch and as my cat invades our chat right now. Hi, Augie.
Perfect timing. Nice intimate moment.
And I think this is perfect timing because we think about how much we're really missing touch and we're really missing that kind of intimacy and those kind of connections. And we're able to have those kind of connections in museums that we don't have in certain spaces. So to still have access to art, to still be encouraged to engage with art and to connect with one another and to connect with artworks that you wouldn't really expect. I mean, I think just the conversations that Andrew and Orlando and I have had over the last few weeks preparing for this have been so enriching and really highlights, I would say, of my weeks. And I hope, you might say the same. And just to really bring a little bit of light in all of our lives at an extremely, extremely strange time. And I think that's exceptionally healing. And I think that's something where, we're in a time and place often where the arts are seen as unnecessary, but really it's the thing that makes us whole. It really is.
We could go on about this, and there's even one wonderful question. This is what happens. Wonderful questions come in because they stew and develop, right, over the course of our conversation. There's a question about how do museums and curators wrestle with the opposition of preserving an object's original use when one can, of course, not touch the object on display. And all to say to that, Kristen, I'm sure we could talk for another 5 minutes about that. We're actually going to be talking about care for objects next week. So I'll say that tune in next week and join that conversation where one of our conservators will be joining us. So this is a way to wrap up. I want to thank Kristen and Orlando for joining us and for your wonderful thoughts and hard work. Thank you. I want to thank all of you out there for joining us too. If we didn't get to your question during the program, or if you have more, you can always go to ArtLens Ask on the CMA website, and someone will get back to you with an answer. We have a kind of a little image right now of what that looks like, and we'll also put the web address in the chat. Desktop dialogues will happen every Wednesday at noon. As I just mentioned, next week we're going to have conservator Beth Edelstein and collection manager and educator Sabina Kretschmar. And they're going to discuss how the museum cares for its collection and really discuss who does the work of care, all the people involved. And they're going to focus on the Mourners, which is a set of sculptures from the 15th century, from the 15th century tomb of Philip the Bold, but also bring in other related objects. So I welcome your questions. I think we will get into some of these ethical questions as well. If you'd like to watch this program again or share with a friend who missed out, just check out CMA's website and YouTube channel. And we will see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.